angle bracket. Okay, we'll start by creating a sketch of this view. Let's go to CATIA. Okay, so pick any plane to draw on. I'll pick the XY plane. Sketcher. Okay, so I'm going to start by drawing at the origin at 0, 0. Okay, so I'm holding on to the wheel to pan. And before I start my sketch, let me check my units. The PDF file is in inches, so let me check my units. Go to Tools, Options. Open General. Go to Parameters and Measure. Go to the Units tab. And you go to the length. And I'm already set 2 inches. If you had to change it to millimeters, just go to the drop down. And pick millimeters. Oh, there it is. It wasn't displaying millimeters. There's millimeters. This one is in inches. Okay, so we are in the correct units, inches. For length, and okay. All right, so I'm going to use profile. It's faster if I go with profile instead of using lines and arcs. Profile will allow me to jump between lines and arcs. So let's go to profile. I'm going to start at the origin. Now you can see that my cursor is snapping to the grid. If you want to turn that off, click on this one, and then it's free from snapping, as you can see. Now when I clicked on profile, the sketch tool is extended. Let me hit escape and exit the command so you can see it'll collapse back to its default. Okay, so once again, I prefer to have snap to point off. I don't want to snap to the grid. So let's go ahead and use profile. You're going to see it extend, giving me more options in the middle of this command of profile. So I'll start at the origin at 0, 0. And I want to go horizontal. I need to go back and check the dimensions, but I'm just going to draw a rough sketch and then come back and apply dimensional constraints to my sketch. Okay, so let's just get the overall sketch, the profile first. Okay, so there I have a horizontal. It's blue, letting me know it's horizontal. And click. Now if we go back to the profile, this is round. So I need an arc, then I'll go straight, horizontal, and vertical to finish off. All right, so since we're in the middle of the profile command, we have these options. So right now the default is line. If I want to go to arc, continue my profile with arc, click on arc. I don't know the radius. I'm just going to guesstimate and click, and it defaults back to linear. You can always go back to arc if you want an arc tangent to the existing arc that we just created. Let's go back to linear, the default. Now, I don't know the angle. It's okay, I'll come back and add the angle. But I do want to stay tangent to the arc. So I'm going to move the line so it stays tangent, and you'll see it light up. As you can see, you'll see the tangency constraint light up. There it is. I'm going to click, and I'm going to go horizontal again. And it's blue, and I'm tracking. It's blue, letting me know it's horizontal. Click. I want you to notice that when I created this line, it created a horizontal constraint. You can see the little h. Now I want to go vertical. I want to close this off. So let's go ahead and close it off. Okay, there it is. I closed the profile, and it automatically exits the command. Now, I clicked in space to deselect. So now I want you to notice that it generates V for vertical constraint. We have coincidence. We have horizontal. We have tangency, horizontal constraint. And by the way, I can always go to the constraint and I can go center graph and it'll take me directly to the tree. And here are all my constraints for this sketch, as you can see. Now, as I was creating the profile, CATIA is generating these constraints. In order for it to generate constraints, you need to have these on. The default settings for CATIA is to have these two icons active. You can see it's active because they are both orange. One generates constraints and the other one generates dimensional constraints. Okay, so always keep these on. And by the way, if you accidentally ever lose this toolbar, which is very common when you're first learning CATIA, sometimes you'll accidentally turn it off and forget that you turned off the sketch tools toolbar. All you have to do is right click on any icon, and turn on the sketch tools and it'll come back. Okay, I'm going to just dock it here on top. I'm going to dock this one on the side. There's plenty of room. All right, so there's our profile. Now let's add some dimensions. So let's go back to the drawing. So this has a length of 8. Now the length of this horizontal line, which happens to be the same length to the center as to the flange, which is 11 inches. So 11 inches from the inside wall to the tangent point. Same thing, 11 inches from the inside wall to the center of the arc or the hole. Okay, what about the thickness? So we have a wall thickness of 0.38, which is typical for the wall thicknesses. And we can see it here also referenced as 0.38. So the length from this outside wall to the center or outside wall to the tangent of this horizontal line is 11.38. The angle is 45 degrees and the arc has a radius of 165. Okay, so let's go back, add those dimensions. All right, so let's go with 11.38 first. That's an easy one to forget. So this length here for the horizontal is 11.38. Double click to change it. Okay, so 11.38. And okay. And now let's add the height of 8. So dimensional constraint. Okay, position it, double click. Let's go with 8 and okay. Now let's add an angle of 45 degrees. So angle. (45 degrees). Okay. And we have an arc radius of 165. Okay, so let's add the arc radius of 1.65. 1.65 and okay. Right, so there's our profile. I'm going to go ahead and collapse my constraints branch. Okay, if I ever need to go back to it, I can always open it back up. Just don't want to have a long tree. All right, so sketch looks good. It's always a good idea to do a tool sketch analysis. And you want to see closed. If I click on the profile, it's only one profile listed. Notice it highlights it. Okay, and we have 5 curves. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and it's closed. So typically for a sketch, you want a closed profile. Now, if you ever make a mistake with the profile, so let me go ahead and intentionally make a mistake here. I'm going to use profile again. I'm going to hit escape and I'm going to intentionally make 2 errors. I'm going to cross the line and I'm going to leave a gap. So a profile like this, you wouldn't be able to do a pad unless you were doing a thickening. So when I do tool sketch analysis, it's going to recognize there's something wrong. We have openings. So again, we do a tools, sketch analysis. We have the dialog box pop up and it gives us a list of all the profiles. So there's the first profile, highlight it, second one, and the third one. And let's just click away to deselect. Okay, so open profiles are dangerous because they're typically hard to see. So anytime you have a gap, it will not be able to perform the pad unless you're doing a thickening. Okay, so, and these gaps are hard to see. So anytime you run a sketch analysis and you see open, look for these little cyan circles. So the cyan circles tells you it's the endpoint of the profile. Here's the other profile and its endpoints. So always look for cyan endpoints. It'll let you know that there's some type of discontinuity, there's a gap, there's a cross. So when you're zoomed out, it's hard to see the gap here in this corner, but you can see the cyan circles. And when you zoom in, you'll see the gap. So you would have to fix this gap and also fix this overextensions. All right, so let me go ahead and delete them. Now these are not part of the sketch, so I can just click on the open profile and hit the eraser, delete. Go to the next profile and delete it. And there it is, we have our closed profile. Okay, so I'm going to close and I'm going to exit the sketch. And I'm going to do a pad. So let's see what the thickness is. Thickness is 0.38 thickness typical. So TYP is typical, meaning the thickness typically is 0.38 unless otherwise stated. Okay, so all the walls here are 0.38 inches in thickness. And you can see here the units are in inches. Okay, so let's do a pad of 0.38. Type in 0.38. Hit preview. Yeah, looks good. And okay. All right, so now let's create the flange or the wall here. So let's go back to the PDF file. So now we're going to create the wall. Here's the profile. So we'll start with the simple profile. And notice the slots. One center point of the slot aligns with the arc on this side, and same thing for the opposite side. The center of this slot lines up with the center of this arc. Okay, so let's go ahead and draw the profile. Okay, so I'm going to zoom in. So I can sketch on this surface or I can sketch on the plane. They happen to be coplanar. It's safer to actually sketch on a plane than on a solid. These three planes, the XYZ planes, will never disappear. You cannot delete them. They're always there. You can hide them, but you cannot delete them. The solid can be altered or deleted, and any sketch attached to any of the surfaces would not be able to exist because it's dependent on the solid. So if I was to draw a sketch on this surface, and then later on I have to delete this pad, that new sketch would not be able to survive because it's dependent on this surface, using it as a sketch surface. But since we know we're not going to make any changes, you can go ahead and pick this surface. I'm going to go with the plane. It's just a habit. I prefer to sketch on planes. Okay, so let's sketch on the plane. Okay, one thing that you may not be aware of is the project command. Looks like a floating textbook. So let's take a look at this toolbar, the operations toolbar. Okay, so we can project onto our plane sketch, which is a 2D, right? Let me rotate slightly just to show you that I can project anything I want. So any geometry in space, whether it's an edge, a solid, a surface, a curve, a spline, a line, a point, I can project onto my plane, and you can see the grid on my plane. Let me rotate so you can see this grid. That's where my sketch goes. It's 2D, not 3D. It's a 2D operation we're in the middle of. Okay, so I'm going to show you that I can project this arc. I'm just going to project it and flatten it out because it's 2D. And let's project. And okay. I click in space to deselect. So you can see it brought the arc. So it just projected the arc and it flattened it out because it's a planar sketch, 2D sketch. I'm going to now project this edge just for practice. You don't have to do this part. It's just to show you what happens when you project something. And okay, it projected that edge into my sketch. So projects normal, perpendicular to my sketch. Now notice how it's orange and this one is yellow. The reason it's orange is because it's still selected even though it did exit the command. It keeps it selected. So one thing to note in the sketch, open up the sketch branches, go to the use edges. So anytime you project something from space into your sketch, it generates a use edges geometric set. And you can see what it projected over. Okay, so notice it's selected. It's orange because this element is selected, but if I just click in space, it'll deselect. And notice it turned yellow. All right, so just wanted to show you how projects work, how it works. But I don't need them, so I'm going to just go ahead and delete them. I'm going to use the delete button on the keyboard. The one I am going to project is this bottom edge. This is the one I need. Now to go back to parallel sketch, parallel to the screen, all I have to do is click on normal. So next to the magnifying glass, you have normal. So it'll reorient my sketch parallel to my screen. Okay, I can send this toolbar back by just simply double clicking on it. I'll try it again, double click, and it'll place it back in its correct position. It'll dock it. All right, so I'm going to project this edge selected. I'm going to project it and hit OK. And then click in space to deselect. And there's that edge I just brought in. Let me just darken the background a bit. You don't have to do this. Just want to show you that I projected that yellow line. So I'm just darkening the background. Also by darkening, you can no longer pick any elements in space. Let me go back and light it up. Just wanted to show you that we have that line projected, that edge. So if this solid was to ever change in length, that projected line would also change with it because it depends on the solid, on that edge of that solid. So once again, if this solid changes in length, this projected line will also change with it. Okay, so now let's do our profile for that wall or that flange. So I'm going to use profile again. Pick the endpoint, click, go vertical, click. Let's bring back this toolbar. Notice that when I clicked on profile, my sketch tools extended, giving me more options. So now I want to create an arc. When it turns blue, that's a 90-degree angle. Anytime it turns blue, it has reached an increment of, or a multiple of 90 degrees. So that's 180, 270, and 360. Okay, let's go back to 90. There it is. That's a 90-degree angle. Click. And I want a horizontal line. It's not turning blue. I'm going to have to manually turn it into a horizontal line after I finish the sketch or the profile. Okay, and click. It looks horizontal, but it did not add the horizontal constraint. So I'm going to have to come back and add the horizontal constraint. Okay, now let's do an arc. Again, let's look for blue. And that's 90 degrees and click. Now I was trying to trace this endpoint. As you can see, I'm off. It's not vertical as I was hoping it would be. Okay, so let's go ahead and close the profile. And by closing the profile, this time it did not exit automatically. I'll just have to either hit escape on the keyboard or turn off the command. Okay, so click in space to deselect. So what constraints do we need? So one simple way of finding out what constraints you need to turn it green is by grabbing any element and just pulling on it. So you can see some of the elements are free to move, and it's because we're missing constraints. Okay, so let's go ahead and add a horizontal constraint on this horizontal. It's missing the horizontal constraint. Even though it's currently horizontal, I can still grab an endpoint and change its orientation. So let's go back, select this line, and add a horizontal constraint. There it is. Okay. Let's add a vertical constraint to this one. Click. Add a vertical constraint. There it is. Okay. Now we're missing tangency between the arc and this vertical. Let's see if I can force it to come apart. I was trying to get it to change orientation here, but I couldn't get it to do it. But that's okay. Let me go ahead and add a tangency. Hold on to the control key when you're selecting more than one element. And I'm going to go ahead and add a tangency constraint. Tangency. And OK. All right. So once again, grab any white line, in this case a horizontal line, or any white element to find out why is it still white. So we're missing constraints. If I was to try and move the green vertical line, it's not going to let me. I can extend its endpoint, but I cannot move it left to right. It's constrained by the vertical, and it's also constrained at 0, 0. All right, so let's go get some dimensions from the PDF. So the length of this line, or the distance from the base to the center of the arc, or center of this slot, is 3. And we have a radius of 1 inch. So 2x means that there are 2 elements, in this case 2 arcs with the radius of 1 inch radius, 1 inch radius. Okay, so let's go back, add our constraints. So let's add our dimensional constraint to this line, which is 3. Double click, change it to 3. Okay, let's add the radii to both corners. So dimensional constraint. So this is 1 inch radius, and OK. And do the same thing on the other side. 1 inch. And as you can see, now it's turned green, letting us know that it's fully constrained. I can no longer move anything. It's constrained. Trying to move it because everything's green, everything's constrained, everything is defined. All right, so now we need to insert slots. All right, let me zoom in a little bit. Okay, so the slots are lined up with the arcs. So the center of the arc, this center point of the arc of the slot lines up with the arc. Same thing on the other side. And they have lengths of 2, center to center. And we have a radius of 0.30 for both. Okay, so let's go ahead and create the slots. Okay, so to get to, instead of drawing circles and lines, I'm going to use this command called the elongated hole. Let me move these toolbars out of the way. Double click, and they'll dock themselves in the correct spot. Okay, so below profile, or next to profile, we have rectangle. If you go to the pull down, you have the 4th option called the elongated hole. This is one of my favorite commands. And one thing you can do when you go to the pull down to get a sub toolbar, you can actually grab it by the handle and drag it out and make it a permanent toolbar. The reason we have all these sub toolbars hidden is because if you were to have all these toolbars along the periphery of your screen, of your window in CATIA, that would just be commands all over the place and buried, and you would have to go look for them. So you could just simply go to the pull down. Okay, so we're going to select elongated hole. You can see it's also activated here. Okay, so we're going to go to the center. And it's going to be horizontal. Click. And click to define your radius. All right, now I wanted to point out the constraints. Let's go back to this toolbar. By having these 2 active, you can tell they're active because they're orange, it generates all these constraints. Look what happens if I have them off and I do the exact same command. I'll just do an elongated hole here on the side. I want you to notice that it doesn't generate any constraints. Okay, so because I had these turned off. So you always want these on. Again, the default for CATIA will give you these icons as active. It'll show as orange, letting you know it's active. So always leave them on. Okay, so let me go ahead and delete this slot. Okay, so once again, having these on, it generated these constraints, tangency, and our distance from the center to the edge, which also happens to be our radius. Okay, so our radius is 0.30. There it is. And the length is 2 inches. And okay. All right, so this should have turned green, and it didn't. Somehow I'm missing a constraint, so here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to grab onto it. So this should have turned green. So let me grab onto any part of this profile and just move it around. Oh, so somehow it didn't constrain itself to this arc. I thought I picked this center point to constrain it. So I'll do it manually. So I'll just hold on to the control key, pick this center point, pick this center point, and we're going to put a concentric relationship. And it's not, oh, I shouldn't have picked the points. I should have picked the arcs. I'm trying to pick concentric here. So let me cancel, hit escape. I selected the wrong items. This was pre-selected. Let me hit escape to deselect. Click the arc. Hold on to the control key. Click the next arc. And let's try it again. Go to constraints. And now we do have concentricity, meaning the center points will line up with each other. As you can see, there it is, and it's green, and okay. All right, we can recreate the slot again over here on this side. But let's take advantage of mirror. So just to show you another command, maybe you're familiar with it. All right, so let me, this sub toolbar, let me go ahead and close this. Again, I can always access that toolbar again by going to the pull down here. And I'm going to go ahead and double click, so it'll dock it back. Same thing with this one. Double click, it'll dock it back in place. And now let's take a look at mirror. Okay, so we're going to mirror the slot over to this side. We could have done another slot, but hey, let's go ahead and practice a mirror. So first I need a line of symmetry. So I'm going to use the line command. And I'm going to pick the midpoint. See how the circle fills up, letting me know that's a midpoint. And click. And let's do a vertical. Doesn't matter which way I go. It can go up or down. Okay, so now let me click in space. Now this line is not part of the sketch. This is going to be a construction element. So I need to change it to a construction element. Okay, so before we do the mirror command, let me introduce you to construction. Okay, so this line is not part of our sketch or part of our profile. It is part of the sketch, but it's going to be a supporting element. Okay, so I'm going to click on it, and I'm going to change it to a construction element. And there it is. See how it's turned into a dashed line versus a solid line? And then click in space to deselect. Now, one thing you will forget is to turn this back on to regular standard line, a regular solid line. So if I create another element, let's say I just randomly create a circle, and you're wondering, hey, why is this construction? Well, you forgot to turn off construction. Okay, let me go ahead and delete this. All right, so I gotta go ahead and turn off construction. Okay, there it is. You're gonna constantly be clicking on this back and forth if you're gonna be using a lot of supporting geometry. Same thing with this line. This is a construction element. It's not part of the sketch, but it helps us generate this slot. If we were to delete this, then we would lose some of our constraints. Okay, so let's go ahead and mirror. So I'm going to pre-select the slot. I'm going to window capture a slot, and I'm going to use mirror. I'm going to mirror about this vertical line, this construction element. Click, and there it is. Okay, so you can see when it generated the slot, the mirror image that's on the left, it generated these constraints, and these are symmetry constraints. So if I was to delete one of them, it's going to lose a relationship with its elements. If I click on one of them, you can see it's telling us, oh, it's locked to this line. If I go to the arc, it's locked to this arc. So this arc is locked to this one, right? It's a mirror image. Okay, so if I was to delete them, if I was to delete all these relationships, you're going to see how I'm just using the delete button on the keyboard. By deleting these symmetry constraints, now it's free to move and it's no longer going to stay, it's no longer going to be mirrored to our original profile, which is a slot. Okay, so let me hit Control Z so I can go back a few times. So Control Z. Okay, I can hit Control Z or just hit the undo button down here. So I can bring back those constraints. All right, so let's do a tool sketch analysis. Tools, sketch analysis, make sure everything's in place. Yep, everything's closed. So once again, remember, do a tool sketch analysis, make sure everything's closed. So we have the main profile, we have the left slot and the slot on the right. Everything is closed. If it shows open, then you have to go in and fix it. If you see open, most likely there's a little tiny gap that's hard to see and you have to go in and close it. All right, so sketch is good, close. Let's go ahead and exit. And as we know, the thickness is 0.38, so let's do a pad. Let me rotate. Okay, there it is. And I'm going to do a pad. Now it's doing a pad in the wrong direction. I don't want it to go outward. I want it to go inward, so we can hit the reverse button. And the thickness is 0.38. Remember, the wall thicknesses are 0.38, typical. And enter. And there it is. Okay, we can rotate. Okay, good time to practice your mouse shortcuts. If you want to pan, hold on to the wheel. So I'm holding on to the wheel to pan. Okay, let go. I'm going to hold on to the wheel now. And I'm going to tap the right button on the mouse. Tap it. So I'm just going to hit it and let go. So I'm just going to tap it. Then if I move the mouse back and forth, I can zoom in and out. Okay, I'm going to let go of the mouse. Hold on to the wheel again. So hold on to the wheel, press the wheel, hold. And this time, instead of just tapping the button on the right, I'm going to click and hold, and that allows me to rotate. Let go. Now, if I wanted to rotate about, let's say, this corner, then I'm going to click on the wheel and let go. I'm just going to click and let go quickly. By doing that, it centers that point in the middle of the screen. So now when I try and rotate, I'm going to hold on to the wheel, hold on to the right button. It's going to rotate about that point. Okay, just want you to be aware of it. It's going to rotate about a center point in the screen. Okay, if I was to pick this tangent point with the wheel, just click once. Oh, I misclicked. Let's do it again. Now it's centered that tangent point in the middle of the screen. So now when I hold on to the wheel and hold on to the right mouse button and move the mouse, I can rotate. It's going to rotate about that point. So the reason I'm bringing this up is if you have your part out here and you try and rotate, it's going to rotate about a point here in the middle of the screen. So when I rotate this time, notice it's going to rotate about a point right in the middle of the screen. Okay, so if I want to do a zoom fit, here's the zoom fit. Okay, there it is. Okay, so now let's use the hole command. Okay, so we know we have a hole lined up with this arc, so let's go to the PDF file. Okay, so we have a hole. And we're going to do a hole pattern. We'll create a hole and then we'll do a rectangular pattern. Okay, so let's use the hole command. Let me bring it over. Okay, so I'm going to pre-select the arc. By pre-selecting the arc, it's going to line up the hole with the axis of this, or I should say the center point of this arc. Notice how it's red. I pre-selected the arc. Then I go to hole command. Click on the surface. I can click anywhere on the surface and it'll automatically bring it to the center of the arc. Click. So you can see it centered it with the arc. All right, so let's take a look at the size of this hole. So all 4 holes, so 4x tells us that there are 4 holes, have a diameter of 1 inch. Okay, let's go back to CATIA. So we're going to have a diameter of 1. And we're going to go all the way to last, meaning it's going to go through the entire solid. Okay, 1 inch diameter. Let's hit preview. There it is. It looks good. And okay. All right, so once again, because we pre-selected the arc and then hit the hole command, it automatically centers the hole with that arc. As you can see, it's centered. Okay, now let's use a different command. Let's double click on this toolbar, send it back to where it belongs. Now I'm going to use the rectangular command. I'm going to stick rectangular pattern command. Let's go ahead and pull this one out. I'm hitting shift to change the orientation of the toolbar. So here's the handle, and when I move it around, if I hit shift, it changes the orientation. All right, so let's do rectangular. So first I'm going to pre-select the hole. I can select it here on the solid, or I can select it from the tree. Select the hole. Notice it's orange, it's selected, and I'm going to go with rectangular pattern. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to do a rectangular pattern here. All right, so let's take a look at spacing. So let's go back to the drawing. I want you to notice that the spacing from the first to the second hole is 6 inches, and then from the first to the third is 9 inches. So there's a 3-inch increment here. So I'm going to go ahead and draw a 4th hole here, and I'm going to make them all 3 inches apart. Then I'll come back and remove that hole because there is no hole here. But just so I can use the rectangular pattern and show you some shortcuts, we're going to use that 3-inch spacing. Okay, so in spacing, I'm going to type in 3. Okay, I'm going to hit. So now I need to tell it which direction for our pattern to go. So I need to click where it says reference direction. Then I can select the edge. So you can see, I'm going to hit preview. You can see it's placing the next hole over 3 inches. Notice instances it says 2. So 2 includes the original feature, in this case, the first hole. So there's a total of 2, including the original. If I increase it, 3, 4, preview. There it is. You can see the 4 holes. Okay, obviously this hole is not part of not part of this drawing, so I'll come back and show you how to remove it. All right, so once again, we had to give it a direction, and I picked that edge. Instead of picking an edge, you can also pick a direction with respect to the compass. You can just right click. So if you wanted to go in this case in the X direction, I could have just picked X direction, X axis, instead of the edge. All right, now we need to duplicate the pattern going in the other direction. Okay, so let's take a look at the drawing. And the length is 470. There it is, 470. 4.70. Okay, so now we're going to go in a second direction. So hit the tab, second direction. And in direction, I'm going to right click. Instead of picking an edge, I'm going to say, hey, I'm going in the Y direction. Look at the compass. The Y direction is in this direction. So let's click on Y. And now let's increase the number. So we don't want 1 instance. We want a second row. There it is. Hit preview. It's already given us a second row. The spacing is at 4.70. 4.70. And preview. And there we have holes, right? Now we don't need all of them. So by hitting preview, we can see the hole pattern. Now, if we go back to the drawing, we only have 1, skip, 2, 3, 4. There's only 4 holes. Okay, so how do we remove the holes that we don't want? All you have to do is click on the little orange dots. So I don't want this hole. Click the dot. Notice how it's no longer orange. I do want to keep this one, keep this one, keep that one, and I want to remove the other 3 here. Click on the little orange dot and it'll remove those holes. Hit preview and they're gone. You can always bring him back by clicking on the dot. You can always bring it back, hit preview, and you can go back and remove it. Click the dot, hit preview. Okay, so there's our hole pattern. Hit OK. And we're done with the holes. Okay. All right, now the next step is to do the tabs. Okay, so we're going to do these ear tabs. So I want you to notice that the first tab is 1.81 from this corner. All right, so some of you are going to draw sketches on this surface and draw a rectangle and a second rectangle for the second tab. Do a pad and then round it off with a fillet or maybe use a pocket command. I'm going to show you a faster way. All right, so I'm done with this toolbar. Let me double click to place it back in place. Okay, now something that's not covered in this class, but I do want to go over it, is planes. This is covered in CAD 37, the surfacing class. But planes are very important in part design. Again, I prefer to sketch on planes. So what I'm going to do is look for the plane command. I don't see it. Most likely it's buried in here somewhere. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this toolbar, drag it out, and look for it. And keep dragging toolbars. And keep dragging toolbars. And there's the plane command. Now if I want, I can create a second row of for my toolbars. So you can see. You don't have to do this. This is optional. Okay, and we can drag the others so there's more room. So we can dig out all of them. Okay, so I'm going to use the plane command. Okay, so let's use the plane command. If you don't see this toolbar, then it's the reference. Let's say you don't have it. I'm going to go ahead and close it. If you don't see it, right click and go to Reference Elements Extended. Reference Elements Extended. Notice there's no check mark, so it's not going to show that toolbar. Click on it and it'll bring it back. Okay, so I'm going to put a plane normal to this edge. Okay, so let me rotate so we can get a better look. Okay, so I'm going to put a plane. So go to Plane. Here's my dialog box. Go to the pull down and say normal to curve. So I want a plane perpendicular or normal to a curve. I'm going to pick the edge. There it is, normal to curve. Now it's waiting for me to select the curve. There it is. And the default position is the midpoint. So it's going to place the plane at the middle of this edge. So that's the default. But now I don't want that. I want to put it at the endpoint. So I'm going to click in here. It's already blue. And pick the endpoint. And there it is. It positions the plane at that endpoint. Hit preview. It's already given us a preview, so no need to hit preview. So our plane is normal to the edge at that endpoint. Hey, we can always move it to another point. Move it to this endpoint. As you can see, go back, click on the point window and go back. There it is. And hit OK. All right, so the reason I'm putting this plane here is because I want to offset, create another plane at 181. Okay, so we place the plane normal to this edge at this point. Then I'm going to offset, create a second plane at 1.81. Okay, so let's go back. Okay, so I'm going to create another plane. And I'm going to go offset from existing plane. So offset from plane. Pick the plane. And we're going to type in 1.81. And preview, and there it is. If it's going in the wrong direction, you can always hit reverse. Okay, it went in the right direction. So that's 1.81 and hit OK. So there it is. We have our plane and we're going to sketch on that plane. We're going to sketch the tab. All right, so let's take a look at our sketch. So we're going to sketch the tab. I'm going to go ahead and project this edge, project it over. It'll come in as yellow, and then I'm going to draw my profile. Okay, so let's go back to CATIA. So let's make a sketch on that new plane. Okay, there's that plane, plane number 2, and do a sketch. Okay, so let me just rotate slightly. So I can project this edge, or I can project this edge. It doesn't matter. So I want to use that to anchor my profile. No, I'll go ahead and project the arc. So I'm going to select the arc. So when you're looking at it from this orientation, just pick the arc, and we're going to project. But I wanted to show you from an ISO view to show you how it projects onto our sketch. So I'm going to select this arc and project. 3, 2, 1, project, and hit OK. Notice how it projects it normal to our sketch plane. And again, since our sketch is 2D, that's why it takes the arc and it flattens it out. As you can see, it brought it into our sketch, projected normal. So it just takes every single point on the arc and projects it normal to our sketch plane. All right, so click in space to deselect. I'm going to now select it and change it to a constraint. Notice it's dashed. Let me click in space. Notice now it's dashed. And let me turn off construction. Turn it off, or else it'll just create more construction lines when I start my profile. Okay, let me hit normal. Okay, I'm going to hit normal. There it is. There's that construction line, which was the arc that we projected over. Let me double click and send this back. Okay, so double click on the toolbars to dock him back in place. All right, so I'm going to use the profile command. Let me zoom in a little bit. Okay, so use profile and draw our tab. And I'm going to use this yellow construction line to line up my tab. Make sure you have constraint off. Okay, so I'm just going to guesstimate the size. Doesn't matter. I'll come back and add dimensional constraints. Okay, there we have our vertical. Then we have our arc. Okay, I'm guesstimating the angle of the arc. Click. And we're going to make sure it lines up with the yellow construction line. Let's say it doesn't. Let's say I misclick. Then I close it. Okay, let's say you misclicked and it didn't line up correctly. It's okay. Click in space to deselect. I'm just going to put a constraint between the yellow construction line and the visible object line shown in white. Okay, so hit Control, select both, and let's put a constraint of coincidence. And it lines it up. There it is. And hit OK. So the reason I projected the arc was to be able to select its endpoint to draw my vertical, and it'll constrain it there, and also to line up this line with that construction line. All right, so now let's go look at some dimensions, the PDF. All right, so we have a radius of 125. We have a distance of 250 from the top of the base to the center is 250. We have a diameter of 0.75 and an angle of 30 degrees. Let's do the radius 125 first. Okay, so we have a radius of 125. Let's add the radius of 125. Enter. We know this length is 2.5. Let's add the length. 2.5. And an angle of 30 degrees. Let's go ahead and add a dimensional constraint of 30. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and add 30. And let's go ahead and add the hole. So we're going to add a circle. For the hole, make sure it lines up. There it is with the arc. There it is. And this has a diameter of 0.75. Okay, 0.75. And let's go ahead and do a tool sketch analysis just to make sure everything looks good. Everything's closed. Okay, let's go ahead and exit. And remember, everything has a thickness of 0.38. So let's do a pad. 0.38. And okay, and there's our tab. Okay, so we can use rectangular pattern again like we did with the holes. Okay, so let's use the rectangular pattern. Okay, so pre-select the tab. Use rectangular pattern. Okay, let's pick a direction. The direction will be along this edge. And it's already showing me a preview. Hey, I don't need that many. Let me go back down to 2 instances. That includes the original 2. And a space of, let's go check the PDF. And the space of 1.75. Oh, it's 1.75 minus 0.38. Okay, 175 minus the thickness. Okay, so I'm gonna, in the spacing, type in 1.75 minus 0.38, which is the thickness. I don't want to do the math in my head. Click away, which is 1.37, and hit OK. Okay, so click and space to deselect, and there's our object. And finally, we have some fillets. Okay, so if we go back and let's look at our fillets. Okay, so 0.13 typical fillets, 0.13 for our fillets. We have a fillet, as you can see. We have a fillet here. We can see the tangent lines and fillets around the tabs. Okay, so we're going to use the fillet command. Let's go ahead and dock these back in place. Okay, so here's fillet. Pick the edges to fillet. And the fillet once again was 0.13. I'll go back and check. Okay, so 0.13 for our fillets. And you can go ahead and keep selecting the other edges that have that 0.13. Make sure you pick the edge and not the surface, or else it'll fillet the entire surface. Just pick the edges. Okay, and hit preview. There it is. There's the fillets. Hit OK. All right, so we're done. So, end of angle bracket.